Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Fall.
Hello, Michael. How are you this evening?
Hey, Barry. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm happy to be here again tonight with you to discuss, this discussion of party politics, propaganda, ideology. It began in our discussion of Simone Weil's 1942 essay, I believe, on the abolition of all political parties. And one of the key concepts in her discussion of politics was this notion of propaganda. And we sort of went to an antithetical theorist. Boy, oh boy.
So I have a suggestion. I think, Barry Falk, I think you're trying too hard.
I am trying hard.
So I think what we should do is call this the second part of the Simone Weil episode that is not explicitly about Simone Weil. And let's just, in fact, I'll do it if you want, and just ride us in.
Why don't you do that, Michael? And that will be it.
Yeah.
That'll be it. You ride us in, and then I will talk about Weil, and then we'll be off to the Althusserian races.
Yeah. So what was the year of the abolition of all political parties?
I said 42, but I don't think it's right. Let me check. '43.
Okay. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
I got you, man. I got you. I can crash the plane with the best of them.
You did. Very good. Hello, Michael. How are you doing this evening?
Barry, I'm doing very well, actually.
We're doing great tonight.
Good to see you. It's good to see you. I'm looking forward to sort of, I guess you'd say we're having part 2 of our discussion on Simone Weil's on the abolition of political parties. The only caveat to that is that this is not about Simone Weil or the abolition of political parties. Yeah, as we were talking last time, and I'll cede the floor to you here in a second, but as we were talking last time about her, her take on propaganda and and politics and political parties, we took a little segue into our dear friend Louis Althusser, and decided that he sort of provides an interesting analog to that discussion. And so that's the agenda this evening.
And I'll say one or two things. Thank you for starting us off there, Michael. And I'm going to say one or two things to sort of get us underway. So I guess the first thing to say is, I think one of the reasons why we thought to bring Louis Althusser's 1970 Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses, getting the French communist philosopher Louis Althusser's 1970 essay into the mix, is that we felt that in talking about the limitations that political parties put on thinking, the pursuit of truth, that although Simone Weil did not use the word ideology, a lot of her comments, a lot of her critique of political party thinking seemed to imply ideology, and moreover, seemed to imply that ideology was inescapable, which of course is the famous argument articulated by Althusser in this essay that we will be talking about in greater detail this evening.
Yeah, to sort of reframe that a bit. Not that it needs reframing, Barry, but just for my own personal edification here. When you talk about how propaganda and political parties limit, it's not that it is necessarily the result of human intention. It's just their structure.
Right.
The way I understand it, it's their
Their structure.
structure
Right.
is inherently limiting. And so by bringing Althusser into the discussion, I think the idea here is that he gives us a way of talking about how the limiting effects
Right.
of Weil's propaganda in politics work. So in a way, if you're trying to keep score at home, the way I'm understanding this is that Weil gives us sort of a structure, right? To say, okay, well, political parties and propaganda are one necessarily, two sides of the same coin, um, but they function to, the party functions as a mean as a disseminator, as a fabricator of propaganda. And I think that Althusser unpacks that, gives us a way to unpack that a bit. Is that fair to say?
That's wonderfully, and not only is that fair to say, that's wonderfully well said. And I think I'm just going to add one more thing about Simone Weil, and then I think we can proceed into Althusser's essay proper. And then I think the intention will be to bring back Simone Weil and her argument and the on the abolition of all political parties essay, to bring that back into the fray at the very end, after we've sort of worked through some of Althusser's arguments. But before we move from Bay to talk about the specifics in Althusser, probably is worth recapping um, Weil's alternative to party propaganda or the
Yes.
structures that keep people from thinking. So um, there is the negative view of political parties, of the doctrines promulgated by political parties, and there's Weil's totalizing argument that the very structures, as you put it, very structures of political discourse, and especially of political party affiliation, these very structures kind of hinder the pursuit of truth. And then, before we leave Simone for a while, uh, it's also fair to say that this is a very, while she presents a kind of unequivocal and unequivocal condemnation of political party life in terms of a political affiliation in relation to thinking and the pursuit of truth. They herself is not uh, um, agnostic or skeptic about approaching the truth, but in but truth can never be apprehended in Simone Weil's system by party affiliation. So it can only be pursued when, or can only be sought after and attained. How about, let me start again. It can only be attained if an individual seeks the truth in a very, very specific way. First off, by themselves in a kind of solitary internal movement. That person by themselves, it's not necessarily meaning that you have to absent yourself from society, but there has to be something going on there's a mental operation that needs to be undertaken,
It's an
and
individual, personal,
it's an
yeah,
individual personal focus
attentiveness
of
on,
attentions, right?
yeah.
Through a deep, focused attention, uh, they believes that the individual can get beyond the ego and begin to perceive truth and meaning. And this is important. In this deep, focused attention, and it's kind of the antithesis of political thinking in her formulation, it's not willed. In a way, this deep focused attention isn't me, like, gritting my teeth and, creasing my forehead and thinking real hard. It's basically sort of being open. It's a kind of radical openness to something that, goodness, hard to see what's happening. It's like you have to sort of open yourself radically and allow for the truth to enter you or to penetrate your consciousness, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't think it's worth spending too much time on this because we've done
Yeah,
this in the
yeah.
earlier episodes, but basically the path to truth, the path to not like
Mhm,
the way out of the political propagandistic sort of social world,
mhm,
right, is through God. And the way to do that, and we had talked about Heidegger's The Thing and his description of the jug
mhm,
needing to be filled to have its purpose and shape.
mhm,
And that's really what she's arguing, is that we need to have focused attention and be open to God. And the problem with political parties isn't that any party espouses a particular ideology so much as that they're all of human creation and invention, which is necessarily going to be removed from God, and that there is no halving it. You have to have the full experience, and which requires, as we've sort of fumbled a bit with, but still said, um, complete attention, focused attention,
right, right. Focus
and
attention. Mhm,
and that's not a social process. And the problem is that
right,
political parties are social process, or any sort of, for her, political parties, or the whole idea of the political party transcends politics. It's any sort of human centered gathering with
right,
purpose or intent,
right.
because it's going to be human centered. So yeah, we thought Althusser is a good way of talking
Of
about how
thinking
that works.
of thinking about how structures of politics. So we're moving from Weil's critique of political thinking as a deformation of thinking to thinking about how Althusser believes that Althusser's argument that there are structures in society, in social systems, that also kind of block us from a real understanding of our real existence. The word real and the opposite of the real, the imagined. Those are the two polarities or
That's
binaries,
that.
poles of this essay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said, I think. So shall we?
Yeah. So we shall. So now moving quickly to Althusser. Althusser, first off, I guess there are many things going on in this essay. We're giving only a partial view, but hopefully our partial view will be somewhat illuminating. I suppose one of the first and most important distinctions that Althusser makes in this essay is a distinction between, um, and this is 15 on page 15, if you're following at home and keeping score at home, and we hope you are. We are reading, let me go to the very beginning of this text and we're reading the Ben Brewster translation, uh, which was originally published in Lenin and Philosophy and Other Essays by Louis Althusser. And I think I got this from the Marxist Library online. So moving to one of the first, one of the initial and most important distinctions that Althusser presents between repressive state apparatuses and his new term, his new idea of the ideological state apparatus. The big distinction, well, first off, I'm going to read a list of what he calls ideological state apparatuses, or ISAs. And so first I'm going to read the list, and then I'm going to try to define them in relation to his other key term, repressive state apparatuses. With all the reservations applied by this requirement, we can for the moment regard the following institutions as ideological state apparatuses: the religious ISA, the system of the different churches; the educational ISA, the system of the different public and private schools; the family ISA; the legal ISA, the political ISA, the trade union ISA. That's an interesting one to put in there because the trade union ISA, or remember that Althusser is a Marxist.
Hmm.
So interestingly enough, he includes the trade unions as constituting an ideological state apparatus. The communications ISA, very near and dear to Michael and myself because that's the media, and the cultural ISA. So one thing to note about this is the inclusiveness and the interlocking nature about all these ISAs. And so they all kind of they're separate. He enumerates several different ones, but his larger point is they all kind of work together to maintain consent and create consensus. And I'll say one more thing, Michael, and then I'm going to open it up to you. Um, that's the big difference. I used that word a moment ago about consent and consensus, voluntary consent and consensus to the system. That's basically what ISAs are doing. And as such, even though they're specific, as he names them, ISAs, they are all kind of working to a common purpose to of ensuring our consent to the system as it is. And the difference between the ideological state apparatuses that he enumerates, the opposite of that is the repressive state apparatus. And basically, that's really only one thing. It's the army. It's the army and the police, really. Or the police is an arm of the military, right? It's state force. When you get
It's
arrested, when you get thrown in jail, if you get shot by the National Guard, that's the RSA.
is well. So I want to pause for just a quick second, and I don't
Well,
want to
you can
derail us here.
you can pause as long as you want. We're now in the essay. We're here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, we got there.
you got there.
I think that it's potentially problematic to just talk ISA, RSA. I want to take a quick second
Sure.
and just to explain, because I think if we can explain how his notion of infrastructure and superstructure and how superstructure divides, I think that's an important discussion to have, just because we're trying to tie this back to Vey, back to
Okay.
political parties. So,
Do it.
um, the idea here, right? He is a Marxist, and so at the core of this is the ability to sustain the means of production. There's a cyclical sort of rhythm to this that has to be maintained, and so Althusser divides this idea. There's two parts of his model here, right? We have the base, which is sort of the underlying. I mean, how would you define that? That's like, help me, I'm failing for words here. Just
Base is basically for our Marxists, it would be the mode of production. You know, what's the resource you're using resources in order to produce things so they can be bought and sold.
right.
So
So
that's the base. That's
right.
that economic relationship is the base.
Okay. So the superstructure, which
Mhm,
sits in his model on top of the
mhm,
base, is
mhm.
divided into two sections, two pieces.
Indeed.
And this is
Indeed.
what I want to talk about briefly, right? You
Yeah.
have on one hand the repressive state apparatuses,
Mhm.
and on the other hand, the ideological state apparatuses.
Indeed. Indeed.
These two work together. And you had
Indeed.
said that the RSA is the army. Uh, I think that's right, but would it be fair to say that it's also the difference between the RSA and the ISA, right, is that the RSA actually has a sort of tangible aspect to it. So more than just the army, and I think it's an important distinction, more than the army or the police,
Mhm.
it's also the legal systems. It's the it's
That's interesting, Michael. I think I think he doesn't want to include. Let me read you a paragraph. Well, I want you to finish your point,
yeah,
but
I
there's
well,
a
so
passage
so
on 16 that I think directly is speaking to what you're
oh
saying, and
good.
we
So
can
you're gonna
point
let
to
me
it.
stick my foot in my mouth
No,
before. right.
no, not at
I
all. If you, I mean, we can go there directly or not,
no, so
but
I
I
think
want to
so.
get your
So
thought.
the
Yeah.
the idea here, right, is that there is, as I understand this, the
Hmm.
repressive state apparatus, that R is really significant in the
Yes,
RSA,
indeed.
right?
Yes,
This is the ability to punish, the ability to
absolutely.
redirect, really the ability to physically control, okay,
Yes.
to repress. The ISA, and I thought that what got me thinking about this is when you said that the various forms, the various ideological state apparatuses, the apparati, I guess, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Um, work in concert together. And I
Yes.
think that's right. They do, and you're sort of handed from one to the next because
Yes, that's
structure,
absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
within any structure, they serve to reinforce each other. So
Indeed. Indeed.
they
Indeed.
may operate
Indeed.
according to different processes or mechanisms.
That's right.
But the idea is that the RSA is the sort of corrective arm, and the ISA sort of gently nudges you and keeps you in line so that you fit into that infrastructure, the base, and can function in such a way as to be a productive, sustaining member of society. Now, having said that, tell me why the law is not a part of the RSA, and then we can
Well,
move.
uh, I have a disagreement with you on this, but I want to say this in advance. The status of the law in this argument, I think you're right to point out that legal institutions and perhaps also school institutions, Michael, actually, they exist. It's harder to put legal apparatus, put the law, the legal ISA, and maybe even the school ISA solidly in. And I think this is really behind your comment, and I think I agree with this. In Althusser's system, it is hard to put or to be satisfied with putting the legal ISA in the ISA system and not in the RSA system. And it's hard, I think, also to put schooling, or at least elementary education, or kindergarten, or early schooling, solely in the ISA. Nonetheless, I think, and I'm going to read the
I
passage
want to
here, and
see
then
where
we
you,
can
yeah,
comment on the
because,
passage.
yeah,
Let me read the passage directly on page 16 if you
okay.
want to scroll down. And then we can, like, what I'm saying is I'm going to read the passage where I think he tries to answer the question, but I think you're right to feel that it's hard sometimes to put the ISAs solidly in the ISA category. So
Okay. So,
he says, yeah, you want to say something?
nope,
Or
nope, I'm
no,
going to wait.
I'm ready to go.
I'm going to wait.
This is the fact. So um, I'll uh, in pick up on page 16. I shall say rather that every state apparatus, whether repressive or ideological, functions both by violence. Oh, maybe this is our answer. Whether it's repressive or ideological,
Mm-hmm.
ISA or state apparatuses function both by violence and by ideology, but with one very important distinction, which makes it imperative not to confuse the two. Okay, now this is where he seems to say that only the army and the police, as I read it,
Mm-hmm.
only the army and police can be repressive state apparatuses. But we'll return to our question in a moment. This is the fact that the repressive state apparatus functions massively and predominantly by repression, including physical repression, while functioning secondarily by ideology. Interestingly enough, look at that parentheses. It's
Yep.
an interesting one.
Yep.
There is no such thing as a purely repressive apparatus.
So
You know,
I don't
so in
want,
other words, you can't just have force.
No,
You
and the
can't
reason
just
the
have
reason
force.
I would include the legal system as an RSA,
Hmm.
okay? Because he's very clear that there's shades of each in both, right? But to me, the violence of the RSA is in its absolute insistence that things go a certain way. As I understand the significant difference between the two is the ISAs sort of goad you as gently as they can or as forcefully as necessary to a certain position.
Indeed.
The RSAs will drag you there,
And the opposite, and that's their business.
right? The legal system, I am thinking of this in the sense that these laws are written down. And while there is room for interpretation and you can argue at the fringes, right? Murder is murder. And you can argue that you have, this is an appropriate example here, right? You can argue that there were certain instances in play. But at the end of the day, if a person ends up dead at your hands, these are the consequences. I include the legal system because it invokes the law, it invokes the army, it invokes the physicality. I see where you would want to sort of nudge that maybe towards the boundary between the two, but I think, and this is really we're really sort of kind of off in left field here compared to I think the conversation we intended on having, but
No, but this is a good elucidation of a tricky point because I realize that well, I want you to finish your thing, but I realize I misspoke a moment ago and I'm going to try to correct it. Yeah.
right,
Go
I would just say I think that the legal system
ahead.
invokes
Hmm.
the more obvious aspects of the repressive state apparatuses. But
Sure.
there,
Sure.
while there, and I'm sure those among you listening with a legal mind would argue that it is all or largely heavily ideological in terms of how we
Hmm.
interpret the laws.
Hmm.
I think the fact that there is and this is what differentiates in my mind the difference between the legal system and the school system, right? There are expectations about how we will behave in a
Hmm.
classroom, just as there are expectations about how we perform our roles in a family or in a church or wherever. But there are explicit lines that are drawn legally, and so I see that as being a bit more repressive and forceful.
Well, no disagreement there, and I'm just going to go back and do a. I think it's good to sort. It's a difficult text, I think. So I think that this kind of discussion, trying to get the fine tune in our minds the points that he's making, it's not a bad thing to do, even though it's a little bit of field, dear listener, from where we thought we were going, but still, nonetheless, I hope not a digression. But I'm going to sort of go back and do a correction on something I said. I think I was um, insisting on a distinction where, in the sentence I read, he really doesn't want to make a distinction. I mean he does want to. Here's the thing: he does talk about distinctions between the two, but then he says very, very clearly in the sentence I read. I'll read it again. This is the fact that the repressive state
Mm-hmm.
apparatuses functions massively and predominantly by repression while functioning secondarily by ideology. So that sentence, he refuses a binary there. He's saying everything that even in the repressive apparatus, there's a secondary functioning and it's ideological. You're not going to get pure ideology or pure violence in any of the state apparatuses, repressive or not. So he himself is saying that there's a kind of mixed nature to these things. So it's very much what you were saying about the law.
Yeah. So apologies, listeners and Barry, for the digression.
No,
But
but I'm thinking not a digression. And I think that's an important point to make that
so
it's not as schematic as I may have made it sound there. So
no,
that's good
and I
clarification.
think I think that gets us maybe back on track here, right? Just the idea that Althusser's superstructure is divided inexactly between the repressive state apparatuses and the ideological state apparatuses. And I think that it's important to note that the sometimes hazy distinction between the two is down to the fact that essentially they work together to shape behavior in such a way that keeps us in line with preserving the means of production.
Well said. All right, moving on to another sort of core idea of the essay, which is, I think we said a little bit earlier, that he's playing with these, or another set of terms that constantly are evoked in this essay is the imaginary. He's influenced by Jacques Lacan's psychoanalytic theories, and so that's part of what he means what he's referring to when he mentions imagined relations and talks about the imaginary. But he's also, as a Marxist critic, thinking of the real, and the real has to do with the base, the infrastructure that you spoke of as well, right? And for Marxists, the real relations, the real foundation society are always related to the economic mode of production. Now, one of the things he's trying to do, maybe the major thing he's trying to do, is to get us to understand the ways in which bad ideas, misguided ideas, like ideology, he's trying to explain how we can take these bad ideas for reality. How do we come to to construe these ideas and take this artificial frame for an accurate picture of the world. So we're going to work through a couple passages to see if we can sort of work through or understand what he's saying about the relation between the imaginary and the real, and the power of the imaginary. Because he wants to say, and so toward that goal on page 32, he offers a very specific and impactful definition of ideology that deploys some of these terms about the real and the imagined. So I'll read it. We can say the following: all ideology represents, in its necessarily imaginary distortion, not the existing relations of production and the other relations that derive from them, but above all the, in parentheses, imaginary, close parentheses, relationship of individuals to the relations of production and the relations that derive from them. What is represented in ideology is therefore not the system of the real relations which govern the existence of individuals, but the imaginary relation of those individuals to the real relations in which they live. Well, Michael, do you want to take a pass at what's going? Let me say just one thing, and then I'll be here and take a pass. Just referring back to what we said earlier, one of the main discussion threads or nodes of discussion in this essay is this tension between the ideal, the imaginary rather, and the real. And his definition of ideology is basically being shaped in relation to these definitions of the real and the imaginary. So his definition of ideology includes a component of where he talks about the imaginary and the real and the relation between the two. So that's how this quote fits in the larger context of the essay. And what else would you want to say about it?
Well, I think, and I'm going to sort of peel the curtain back a second here, as Barry and I have obviously read this before and talked about this before. And one of the things that has always sort of been a little bit of a thorn in my side trying to make sense of this is this whole discussion of the imaginary, right? I mean, the imaginary distortion, the imaginary relationship, the imaginary relation of individuals to the real. And it frustrates me. But I think listening to you read at this time, I have achieved, Barry, through extreme focus and a little divine intervention, perhaps.
Deep
I think
focus,
I think I
radical
attention.
openness.
I'm paying attention, buddy. I think I understand it, and so um, here I'll use this line. What is represented in ideology is therefore not the system of real relations which govern the existence of individuals, but the imaginary relation of those individuals to the real relations in which they live. So I struggle with this because to me, I don't understand. I'm often, to my detriment, a literalist, and so I look at them like, well, where is the imagination here? Why must this be imaginary? And I don't love the term, but I understand it. I think, and that's that. You know, this is another way of saying that my son's baseball coach loves this. Right? He tells the kids this all the time. It's the stories you tell yourself. Right. Those are the stories that matter that you gotta, this is in key, fake it till you make it. I think pick your cliche. That's kind of what, not to say that Althusser is a cliche here, but it's in that same vein of thought that it's imaginary, I think, because it is rooted in a perspective. I don't see this, I see this as being very
That's very
compatible.
well put.
I
That's
see
very well
this as
put.
being very compatible with Simone Weil's issue with politics, right? Is that they're rooted in a perspective. It's not, to jump back to Weil, and I won't do that often because I understand it's confusing, right? Weil has this problem with politics because they don't originate in the divine, that they originate in the ego. And so that they're subject to, human whims and human desires. The imaginary relation, I'll tell my students in a speech class that there's three speeches that they give every time they speak. There's the speech they plan to give. There's the speech that they think they give as soon as they're done. And then there's the speech that they get to watch afterwards, which is the one that really happened, right?
Mhm.
So what Althusser is saying essentially is that our relationship to the real is very much like that speech, right? You think it's this, you feel like it's that. He's saying we don't have access to the recording though, right? So this idea that there is somehow an official record of your relation to the ideological apparatuses that you are subject to at any particular given point in time, you can't see what that is in reality. You only have your understanding of it. So imaginary does not mean fictitious, right? Like Peter Pan is not going to come down and join you here. Um, it is simply rooted in a perspective which is in some way going to be different than the perspective of your peers, your fellow citizens, whatever. So that's how I am understanding the
Well, that is beautiful, but I've been waiting for
patiently.
you to, huh?
Patiently.
No,
I talked a lot there. I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. Oh, oh, I'm your fan, Michael. No, I was not impatient on that. Here's what I was waiting for. I
Yeah.
wasn't waiting for you to get done, but I was waiting for you uh, to get to another place because I had thought I was sort of assuming that after talking about that's a beautiful definition, and I totally assent to it.
So the
That's a beautiful
question,
definition of the power of the imagination and what the imagination and the imaginary means here. But I thought you were going to also address what's real in
well,
this.
that was,
And
yeah. So that was the follow up question to this. I didn't know if you wanted to
yes,
chime into that. So the question then that begs to be asked here is what is that official recording? What does the real relation look like? And who has access to that? Who can see it? So to jump
and
back to this,
you said a moment ago, do you want to just sort of stick with that, or do you want to add to it? I mean, you said a moment ago there is no tape in this particular
no,
instance.
but just because there's no tape, see, this is what's
Mhm.
interesting, right? Just because there's no actual recording of this, so to speak, to continue
Yes.
with the speech example, right?
Mhm. I liked it a lot, so I want to stay there. Yeah.
It still exists though. Like that
Yes.
relation exists. So
Yes.
the question I'm asking
Yes.
is there a perspective
Yes.
that does have access to a non imaginary view of the relations?
And I think you just answered it. Yes. That is the question you posed, but I think you answered it. There is no tape.
Hmm, I don't like that.
Well,
And I'll tell
I'm
you
not
why.
sure. I'm not sure Althusser likes that, but I mean, I guess
No,
that's in our
I don't mean
closing moment here.
I don't
Yeah.
mean I don't like that in the sense that that it's not pleasing to me. I don't
Oh.
like that in the sense that I disagree with that.
Oh. Okay.
And I'll tell you why I think I disagree with that. I don't know that we can necessarily make sense of it, but we spoke earlier
Well, what do you
about
wait a minute. Well, I was too, I think, quick to say, well, I'm wrong. I'm not sure I'm wrong. Or rather, I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with. Were you disagreeing with me saying that there is no tape?
so let's back up because I don't want to get stuck in the example.
Oh, okay.
We understand why Althusser is saying that it's an imaginary relation to
Right.
our
Right.
to our surroundings.
Right.
My question is, and it's imaginary because it's rooted in a perspective.
Indeed.
My question is it possible to achieve or attain the real perspective, the to understand the real relation?
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so
Right.
I think that there's two ways that this can be done, actually,
Hmm.
right? One is, and I don't, maybe this isn't possible, but objectively through history, right? We can look back on a much larger picture that is outside of an individual perspective, perhaps. And the second one, and this is here's the dangerous can of worms. So I'm going to say right now, I'm going to sort of drop this, and I'm okay to maybe come back and marinate on this another time.
Hmm.
I'm thinking about Simone Weil and her position about, regarding politics and
Hmm.
the need to isolate yourself and be attentive for her to God, right? To be filled. And
Refill.
that is how we reach sort of truth, knowledge, understanding, right? That is not clouded by propaganda and politics. I think the same sort of thing is in play here because but with a different lens. What you need is somehow to have a fully objective, detached view of the relations. So we said that the ISAs work together. I'm wondering if it's possible to are there cracks between them? Are there spaces um, amidst the ISAs that sort of take us out of them momentarily, from which we can reflect upon how they actually work? Because the problem is, right, if you leave your family, but you go to the job, right? Well, maybe you have a moment away from the family ISA, but you're now stuck in the job ISA. And if you leave the job and you go to the church, well, now you're stuck in the church. And if you leave the church and you go to the army, well, the army's got you twice because it's both an ISA and an RSA in this instance. But is it possible to go sit in the woods and reflect on this?
What you were describing before you got to the woods was Michel Foucault's life work.
Yes.
Because I think Michel Foucault basically said, um,
We're passed from one to the
we
next
are
to the
passed
next.
from one ISA, although he didn't use that term, but we are passed from one institution to another. That institution,
Disciplines us and
yeah,
teaches us how to be a
disciplines
person,
us,
right?
teaches us how to be a person. And also, Deleuze's reading of Foucault, I think it's there in Foucault, but certainly Deleuze emphasized it even more. There are moments of rupture, when you do pass from one
Mm-hmm.
institution to another. So the the I mean, what you were describing, I think, was very Althusserian until you got to the woods. I think that what Althusser and Foucault would say is that we can't. Okay, so I don't know. I'm about to give my answer.
I'm
Did
done.
you give? Did you finish giving your?
Absolutely.
I think, and this is what well, I guess we could leave it here, and then we're going to look at a little bit more of the essay and Althusser's treatment of the differences and the similarities between imaginary relationships and real relationships. So we'll revisit this, but um, I think Althusser would say that there is no Woods ISA, i.e., there is, it's not easy for us to access the real. And that most of the time, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily disagreeing with your point, because, when you were talking about ruptures from within the system, momentary ruptures within the system, I can see how, despite Althusser's totalizing view, I could see this essay, I could see him living or taking as a friendly amendment that there are moments when you're at school, when you're at church, when you're at wherever, or the legal ISA, maybe especially, there are the moments when you feel your discomfort, your ill fit, when the ideology really isn't working for you, right? And you could be in the ISA, and there's going to be a momentary rupture where you
Mm-hmm.
feel
Mm-hmm.
you stepped out of it. I don't, so I do think that uh, the idea of a momentary break in ideology or a temporary break in ideology, I think that's very consonant with his approach. But I think that the force of this essay, or the thrust of this essay, is to say it's very hard to imagine an outside and access to the real. In fact, for me, the big question for this essay has always been, how is it possible that Althusser could write it?
So it's funny that you say that because I think that I agree with you. So first of all, this is not me recanting, but I agree with you. And the reason for it is that in order for the real to be real, doesn't it need to make sense in a way? And if it makes sense, and this is part of the reason, and we'll talk about this next time, I think this is part of the reason why he says ideology has no history,
Right,
right?
right, 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 right.
Like, in order for the real to make sense, like I could pick you up and deposit you in a foreign land and you could look around and you would not have an imagined, well, I guess you might have an imaginary relation, but you wouldn't be a part of the real. You would be outside of it, and therefore you might have a more objective perspective. But the problem is it's not the real because it doesn't make sense to you, right? So in order to make sense to you, you have to understand it. In order to understand it, here's the big word for next time, Barry.
And
There
you have
has
to
to be
internalize the practice. You
there's
have to
interpolation.
internalize it.
You have to
Yeah,
be a part
right,
of it.
right,
And
right,
so I agree 100%. You can't get, I think that there are moments, right? Like Stiegler calls it noesis, where you step outside,
right.
daydreaming. So it's, I guess to tie it back to Vey momentarily, it's almost as if, yes, you can pay attention, but the amount of attention that you can pay, which is funny because that sounds like the very opposite of daydreaming or having rupture. But I think that they are necessarily momentary, they're fragments as opposed to true breaks or departures.
I actually think the connection to Vey becomes stronger when you make that concession, when you say that, it's momentary and temporary. I think that I think, Vey seems to stress this all the time, how difficult it is to pay attention. You know, and it's difficult to keep your desires and your promptings. And you were talking about objectivity. They definitely feels that, I mean, and she has a specific understanding of what objectivity means in those moments of attention, that you have to detach yourself from your usual interests, fears, and desires. So I think actually this idea of a momentary rupture with the imaginary relationship and a momentary merger with the real is something that I think is very consonant with Weil's understanding of attention.
Well, I think this is a good pause point. Um, shall we pick this
Yeah,
up with the
well,
idea that maybe next time we talk about
the
ideology and
real,
interpolation, the real and
yeah,
the imagined?
sure, sure.
All right, well, Barry, this was good.
Let's do that.
Maybe not our most focused discussion, but enjoyable nonetheless. I appreciate it, and yeah, good
Next
work.
time, next time, total focus.
Total
We
focus.
promise.
Pay attention, Barry.
Total
All
focus.
right, take care, sir.
Thank you, Michael.